Hey everyone, and welcome to my rundown on the Angular 5 HTTP client module. For this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a quick test project that's just going to run through a few of the basics of what's changed in the client module, how you can use it, and how you can get the best out of it. So the first thing we need to do is obviously create a new project. Obviously I'm using Visual Studio Code, I'm on a MacBook, so here we go. I suppose we'll fire it up and let's see how we go. So we're going to create a new project first. At this stage, I'm assuming everyone knows how to do this. If not, I'm going to be posting some videos in the next couple of days showing how to create a new project, and I'm going to go the whole way through building your first project from the intro to the CLI like you just saw there, right the way through to a final working Angular project. Okay, so this takes a few moments just to run through. I'm going to skip over a bit of this just to get it going. We'll jump into the new project. And there it is. So that's the new project that's been scaffolded for us by the CLI. This will open up and you can see there in the panel on the side, there's your project. So the first thing we'll do is we'll just initialize the repository. Obviously you don't have to do this, it's just a habit of mine to make sure that everything's controlled with source control. Right, so into the project. Alright, so this is basically what it gives us. It gives us a standard application with a basic app, your standard module, and your first component. Now, none of this is really important to the HTTP client module, but in order to demonstrate it, we need to have it. So the first thing you need to do is you need to import the HTTP client module. Now, this is moved from where the HTTP client used to be. It's now in Angular/common/HTTP. So it does break. If you try and upgrade from 4 to 5, it breaks. It doesn't automatically do this for you. The HTTP module where it used to be has changed, as is the client. It's now in a deprecated folder. So you are going to see some differences. You're going to have some difficulty moving a project, but it should be as simple as a find and replace all to move it across to the latest version. So you can see there, the client module doesn't exist where it used to be in Angular/HTTP. There's no reference to it at all. So we'll get rid of that. We don't need that. And we will run purely on this. Right, so now that we've got that there, we're going to have to import it. This is pretty common stuff. If you're using Angular very often, you'll be well aware of this pattern and how it all has to work. Right, so we've got the module, we've got the module imported. Let's jump into the component. Now normally obviously you wouldn't do any of this kind of work in the app component, but again this is just for demonstration purposes. So what we're going to do is we're just going to stick the data array right here on the component. Type it as any. I'm against typing as any. Coming from C# as a background, I don't use any, but for the purpose of this I'm just going to use it while we get everything set up. I will type this later. And so what you could do, if you're this way inclined, you could stick the HTTP client module right here and do all your work in your component. This is not best practice. Obviously, nobody does this, and I wouldn't recommend doing it either. This is the type of logic you would normally extract out to a service. Okay, so I'm setting up the getData method here. What this is going to do is this is going to, as a start, we're just going to return an array just so that it is showing that it works. Basically, it's just to finalize the component at this point. Like I said, this is not how we're going to run things. Let's get rid of this. We're not going to use this here. Not even for demonstration purposes do I feel comfortable doing that. So we'll get rid of this altogether and let's generate a service. So I like to use the CLI to scaffold anything extra that I'm going to add into my application. So we fire up the terminal and it's as simple as using ng g for generate, s for service, and then the location and name of where I want to put it. So logically services/data service. Data service is fine for this Yeah, so you just call it data. It's going to add .service.ts on there for you. It will also generate the .service.spec.ts, which is for unit testing. I'm not going to delve into unit testing for the purpose of this video, but I will get to that in the future. So here's the service. Here's where we're going to inject our HTTP module. So private underscore HTTP, and then we'll type it HttpClient. Now, as you can see, my auto importer decides to bring things in from all kinds of random locations. Make sure when you do this you get the correct HTTP client. So let's go with @angular/common/HTTP again. So that's where everything for the HTTP client lives now. So let's go get data, and we will return an array any. Again, this is just for demonstration at this point. This .http, now this is not unfamiliar territory, this is pretty much how it used to be. .get, because we're going to get, but as you can see, you've got all your normal HTTP verbs available. Now normally in any other, or in the previous HTTP client, you could just go here and put in your base address for your API or whatever backend service you're hitting. You can absolutely still do it the same way. There's no reason why you can't do it the same way here. And this will work, but you are cutting out a lot of that functionality you get with the latest HTTP client, which is the reason that we use it. So we can return this, and it's still going to give us a problem. And the reason that it's still giving us a problem is because the new HTTP module sends us back an observable. We don't get an array, and we don't get a JSON response. We get an observable, and we get typed responses. So you can see here I've typed it. We're getting back an array of any, and we can then type that later to the return type that we're getting. Again, it still doesn't like it, and the reason it doesn't like it is because I've typed the return class for the method to be an array of any. And we're still, at this point, returning an observable. Now we can, with this module, we can return the array if we call subscribe on that get method, and then we can return back the array if we choose to. Generally speaking, what I will do is I will pipe that into the view, and I'll show you how to do that later. So here, now that we're calling subscribe, we'll map to our response, and then the data array that we've just created, the property, we will set to the response. Simple as that. Now, with the old module, you would have had to have mapped that to JSON first, and then made all of the adjustments after the fact. The new module assumes JSON by default. So it assumes that what you are going to get back from your API call is JSON. It's definitely beneficial. I know that almost every service that I hit does return JSON as a default. That being the case, the amount that you get away with not doing things with the new module is really great. Now this is some dummy data that I've got from an online API. There'll be a link to that in the description. But this is just a demo API. I'll put in the URL here. So JSON placeholder.typicode.com/users. This is going to get me an array of users. And so what we'll do is we'll type this to user. But to do that, we're going to need a class. So let's make those now. So the way that I'm going to create this, I'm just going to copy this JSON here. It gives us a pretty rich model. We don't really need this much for the purpose of the test, but we'll take it anyway. And I will create all of these now. I'm going to speed up the video for this because nobody really wants to watch me typing out a series of classes just to get things to work. I'll show myself doing it so you can pause it if you need to see it, but I don't think there's anything really interesting about it. Now, I would use the CLI again to generate these, but for the purpose of creating a model class, I don't think it's necessary. It's just as quick to just create a new folder for models, And then inside the models folder, let's add user.model.ts. Now I like to add what I'm creating into the file name, so the user.model.ts, same as you see from the CLI, data.service or app.component. I do this for clarity. When I'm jumping between files, I like to see exactly what it is that I'm looking at. So here I go. I'm just going to speed this up, stick in all of the properties, we'll type all of these properly. Probably shouldn't have said anything and just let everyone assume that I'm a miraculously fast typer. Yeah, no, it's not the case. Alright, so lat and long, good. Alright, back to normal pace. Look, that's what we needed there. I could have stripped that down and only had the top level user if I felt like it, but I feel it doesn't make much of a difference, and this really allows us to show what's going on. It also means that what I put in the display, when I create the view, you'll see something a little bit nicer than just the basic details. Now that these are typed, the TypeScript compiler along with the IDE is going to give us a whole lot more help when we start to use these features elsewhere in the application. We're going to get a bit of IntelliSense to give us a real hand when we start to program towards this service. We'll get some idea of what we can get, what return types we're going to get. Let me just tidy this up. Right, so now we're going to call that, hit subscribe, and that should bring that information back up and into this view when we use the method now. From here, we need to provide that service. This is part of the dependency injection module. We need to provide that and make sure it's imported into the module, and then that can be injected in here. So we'll chuck this in here, we'll make a private service and type it as the data service. And then we can change this here. We can get rid of all of this. Right, so rather than returning anything here, what we might do is we might keep this directly as an observable the whole way through until we put it into the view. The beauty of that is that it stays neatly wrapped. We don't have to call subscribe. We don't have to type a whole lot of extra code to make it do this. Alright, so now we'll type this in the component as well. This will allow us to, again, just bring a lot of clarity to the code and make sure that we understand exactly what we're getting and what we're going to have at every particular level. Now this is the default template that you get for your app component, and we're going to get rid of all the stuff that we don't need. We don't need the image at the top, nor do we need the title, but we'll leave it there anyway, just so that there's something there. But we'll get rid of all of this to start with, and we'll stick something a little bit more sensible in there. So we'll stick in a table. I'm going to show you an Emmet abbreviation. This is a thing that I use a lot, an extension for Visual Studio Code. Now all I've got to do is put in all of the elements that I'm going to have. You can use multiply, so in the body I'll have 2 rows. So I'll also have 2, or actually more than 2, I'll have a series of data columns. Now these are going to be for all the properties that we've put into that user model that we built. We'll go with 5, we'll just do the basic information to start with. Now if I hit enter on this, you'll see it creates me the entire table that I need. So I am going to change these. Now Command D on the Mac will multiple select, so I can select all of these all at once and change these all to TH to give me headings, just like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'll just make sure to put in the headings that I need. That's probably enough information just to pipe it into the view so that we can actually see what's going on. Now in here, I'm going to use a Angular directive. So to do that, we hit star ng4, and this is going to iterate through our list. So we'll go let user of data. Now this is basically saying for each user in the collection labeled data in the template, we're going to use user dot, and there's that IntelliSense I was talking about. Now we've got all the information we need. We can just pump these in one at a time. I like to add those extra spaces in the string interpolation. It's a lot easier to read, and I prefer it that way, but it's not required, and you don't need to do that if you don't want to. So we'll jump in, we'll get the rest of these in. Just tidying up my mess as I go. Okay, so the last one's phone, and then we'll go with the website. And so essentially what this is going to do with that directive is it's going to allow you to, rather than creating enough table rows to allow for all of the users, for every user that it detects in that array, it's going to create a new row and put those properties of that particular user into the row. So that's a nice and neat way of doing this. Now there's another cool thing with Visual Studio Code. Hold down the Alt key and arrows and you can move lines all over the place. So I've just moved that table inside of the div so it's all in the same place, and I'm going to chuck in a button here just so we can trigger the event to go to the HTTP module and grab that data. We can do it manually rather than just having it automatically load every time we load the app. So have it call get data and fetch. And so that's how we handle a click event for that button. So I think that's pretty much taken care of. I don't think I need to add anything extra into the CSS for any reason. So we'll have a look back here, make sure get data. So get data is still bound directly to the data model. And as you saw in the service before, the data property on that service is the result of subscribing to the observable that we get from the HttpClient module. Just change this to this. Right. Now, all things considered, there is no reason why this won't work right now in its current state, and that is definitely one way that you can do things. But it's probably not the best way. It's probably not the best way to go about it. But everybody's, I suppose, opinion on this is very different, and there's no hard and fast rules about when you should subscribe, when you should unsubscribe from your models like this. So as you can see here, I'm gonna go about this the way that I normally would, and I'm going to return the observable itself, and not have the data property at all. So what we're going to do is we'll hit the base address, the observable will come back, and then in the component, when you call that, you're going to be getting an observable. Now, I don't want to subscribe in the component, and the reason for that is I don't want to type at all. Frankly, it's no more extreme than that. I just don't want to type it every time I do this. So we'll call get data. Now you can see IntelliSense is showing me an error here, and the reason for that is we're trying to pipe an observable to an array of user. So if I change this to observable array of users, and I'll have to import observable. Now observable lives in RxJS. The import for this is a lot nicer in the more recent versions, so we can import the same as what we do with everything else. Import observable from RxJS /observable. Alright, so that's that. And I've renamed that, and I've actually renamed it wrong. So essentially, industry standard at this stage is that observables, we mark them with a $ symbol to identify that the property is an observable. Again, this is not something that is a hard, fast rule, nor is it something that you are required to do. It's just something that people have been doing in the industry as a way of denoting that's what you're dealing with. If you've got a $ symbol there, you're dealing with an observable. If you don't, you'll be dealing with the object that's come from an observable. So now here we can type this. You can see the typing there says that it's returning an observable of user array. So let's put that in there. Observable array of user. And again, we have to import observable. Import. And these become second nature after a while. The importing of observable and some of the other properties and operators that you get from RxJS, a lot of them you do get used to where they are and how to import them. It's a lot nicer now than it was 3 months ago. So that's always a good thing. We're seeing a lot of good ground being made with RxJS. It's come a long way. The import size is a lot better than it was. A lot more optimized when you go to production for your initial load size into the browser. But that's probably a topic for another day. Right, so there we go. Now this is not going to work now because we're binding to an observable. So to unwrap that, we can just pipe that asynchronously, and let's put the dollar symbol in there because we need to get it right. And simple as that, that is now going to subscribe in the actual view. And that's when we're going to get our resulting data out of that observable. So if I hit ng serve, this will spin up the local web server, we'll do a compile. Once that's done, we can jump in, have a quick look, and see what we've made. Okay. Just make this a little bit prettier. Figured I might as well make it look nice before we go putting it up for the world to see. There we go, that should center it and keep it looking reasonable so we don't have data all over itself. Right, hit fetch data, and there it is, straight from the API, pulls the data in and pipes it straight through to the view, doing the subscribe automatically in the view. In my opinion, that's the nicest way to do it. It's the least amount of work for you. It's the least amount of remembering, or I suppose it reduces the cognitive load a whole lot when you're doing these things. And I think with software development, the easier you can get something done, the better it is for you. The quicker and easier that it is, and the less things you have to remember to do, the better it's going to be for everybody. Right, so let's just commit this to the repository. Again, this is, like I said at the start of the video, it's not required. I just like to do these things because it's a force of habit now. Right, so in it goes, yes, uncommitted changes. Cool. Alright, so that's in. So now another thing that you get with the HTTP client module, this time around with version 4.3 and onwards, and now fully functional in version 5 of Angular, is the HTTP interceptors. Interceptors are a really great way of controlling what goes on with your requests. So what I'm going to do is I'll create an interceptors folder here, and we'll create a basic interceptor. Now, if you wanted to think about what these do, essentially every outgoing HTTP request that your application makes is going to be caught by this interceptor, and then in the intercept method, you can inject logic into your request. So rather than having all of the code to put headers in, for example, headers or authentication or anything like that, we can do that in an interceptor, and it's set and forget. So once you've made your interceptor that does all your headers or does your authentication, that's in there. Every outgoing request gets caught and has this logic injected into it. So I'm just doing all of the imports. I've done quite a few of these before, so I know what needs to go in there rather than doing it at the time we get in there. Okay, so we'll do observable. Now, injectable has to be in there. This is a lot like a service because the dependency injection module handles this, but at no point do we have to directly inject this into a component. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So I'll just finish importing in all of the HTTP objects that we need from the Angular common HTTP folder. So we've got the HTTP event, the HTTP interceptor, HTTP handler, and the HTTP request. Now the reason that we need all of these things is because obviously the HTTP Interceptor is going to catch the request, then the request is going to need to be handled. Now the event is in there as well, and you'll see why in just a moment. Okay, so at injectable, this is a decorator. It's common for all services, and then we export class Interceptor. Interceptor is going to do for now. Obviously, in a production environment, you give it a more descriptive name. You might have multiple interceptors, one for authentication, one for headers, all the rest of that. So name it appropriately. Now this needs to implement HTTP Interceptor. And to implement HTTP Interceptor, we need to have a method called Intercept. Right. Okay, so we can add that in now. So we'll jump into the body of the class and we'll add a method Intercept. And that is the only requirement for the HTTP Interceptor to be implemented, is we need to have a method Intercept, and IntelliSense should tell us what we need with this. So request is a HTTP request of type any. If you type it, then you can catch only certain types of requests, but for the purpose of this, we're going to go with any. And next is HTTP handler. Now again, the naming of those, it's not necessary, but I like to keep it that way. It's how it's always been shown to me, and it's how I figure I understand it the best. You've got your request, and then what happens next. So rec and next. And this is going to return a observable of any. Actually, it's probably going to return an observable of HTTP event any. Tidy that up in a second. So the first thing I'll do is I'll next.handle, because this is required essentially. Otherwise, your request never goes out. If you don't handle this request using a HTTP handler, the request never gets made, which is going to cause some pretty serious functionality problems. Now IntelliSense again will give us this, hover over this, and like I said, it's going to return a observable of HTTP event of any. So let me just tidy this up. HTTP event of type any. And return. Right, so at this point, what this interceptor is going to do is it'll catch the request and just handle it. So that's all it'll do. So it will be as if the interceptor doesn't exist at this stage. It's just an extra step in the journey. But just for argument's sake, we'll console.log and we'll put in a quick message so that we can catch this in the console and actually see it in action. HTTP request has been intercepted. It's a pretty straightforward message, but it's a pretty straightforward interceptor at this stage. Now what else does it need? Right, it's telling me about the injectors that are going to be deprecated soon. That's not an issue for this purpose. We can run with this as it is. Now we need to provide this. So we'll go HTTP interceptors. Now providing these is a little bit different. You're providing an object that tells the CLI or tells Angular how to handle what we're doing. So let's just jump in here, object, and we need type decorator. So provide HTTP interceptor, comma, and then we need to tell it use the class. So use class interceptor, and we'll get the app to import this automatically. Multi-true. Alright, so that's the interceptor in. So now if we watch the console, if I fetch that data, and the request has been intercepted, it gets caught in the bottom there. Hit it again, and you'll see just a number appends to the front of it saying that it's been hit multiple times. Alright, so that's pretty much it. If you do have any questions, by all means, send me a message here. You can get me on on my website. You can get me on GitHub. You can get me on Twitter. I'll put all the links in the description for this. Yeah, I'd love to know what you think. First video, so obviously go easy on me. I'm definitely working on the production quality. I'm working on a few other things. I have a series that I'm working on at the moment, so I'm going to be end-to-end using an Angular front end and a .NET Core back end, building out an entire application from first line to last line. By all means, have a look, catch up with it when it comes out. It shouldn't be too much longer, and the first one should be out. This has been Alex Nicholas. Thanks for watching.